She wouldn't understand. Just 4 words, yet enough to split the expensive Manhattan restaurant in 2 halves, the one who spoke, and the one being looked down on. That noon, Silverstone Grill shimmered under the New York sun. Its glass walls reflected designer suits, the gentle clinking of cutlery blended with soft jazz, creating the soundscape of power and privilege. At a corner table by the window sat a middle-aged man, flipping through the menu as if the whole world should wait for him. Victor Karim, 45, an international investment tycoon who once shook the Asian financial markets with a single nod. The gold watch on his wrist caught the light every time he lifted his glass, a subtle reminder of its worth and of his own. Then the front door opened softly, and a calm yet confident voice spoke. "Good afternoon, sir. I'm Maya. It's a pleasure to serve you." Maya Turner, 28, approached with a gentle smile and a composed stride, her apron folded neatly. Everyone at Silverstone knew her, not for her looks, but for how she made people feel seen. Every word, every gesture carried the quiet weight of respect. But not everyone cared about that. Victor didn't even look up. Eyes on his phone, he gave a faint tilt of his chin. "Water? With lemon. No, please. No, thank you. Just the cold command of a man used to being obeyed." Maya's smile didn't falter. "Of course, sir. I'll bring it right out." As she turned away, Victor leaned toward his young assistant, Ethan Brooks, speaking in a low voice, Arabic flowing from his lips like a soft blade. Ethan forced a polite smile, not understanding every word, but sensing the contempt woven into each syllable. For a moment, Maya froze. She didn't need to look. The sound alone told her enough. That rhythm, that tone. She had heard it long ago on her grandmother's porch in Cairo. The language of her childhood memories, now being used as a weapon to insult her. The room around her still moved in perfect rhythm, but inside Maya, a chill crawled down her spine. It wasn't fear. It was recognition. She knew this kind of man, the kind who believed money gave him the right to belittle others. She placed the glass of water on the table with flawless precision, steady and silent. Not a single drop spilled. Victor's eyes flicked toward her, indifferent, as if she were an object. "Water," he repeated, as though she weren't smart enough to remember. Ethan stayed quiet, sensing the tension thickening in the air. A few waiters glanced over, feeling that something was off. Maya bowed her head slightly, her voice even. "Would you like to hear today's special, sir?" Victor finally looked up, his eyes cold. "I said water. Do I need to repeat myself?" The air seemed to tighten. For a brief moment, Maya wanted to respond, but she swallowed the words. Not because she was afraid, but because she chose her timing. In the service world, there are 2 kinds of silence, the silence of fear and the silence of control. Maya chose the latter. When she stepped away, Brandon, the bartender, asked softly, "You good?" She smiled faintly. "I'm fine. Some people just don't see the human being in front of them." The words were light, but inside, every Arabic syllable Victor had uttered still echoed. Each sound struck a memory. The Cairo nights, when her grandmother used to say, "Words can bring people low, but they can also lift them higher." Maya took a deep breath, straightened her apron, and walked back to the dining floor. Victor's table still gleamed under the sunlight, the glass of water shining like a challenge. She knew the battle hadn't begun yet, but it would. All it would take was one more sentence, and everything would change. The atmosphere inside Silverstone Grill remained elegant, but at the corner table by the window, something in the air had shifted. Victor Karim leaned back in his chair, one hand holding his glass of water, the other scrolling through his phone. Every movement radiated self-satisfaction, as if the entire world were a press conference meant to praise him. Across from him sat Ethan Brooks, his young assistant, eyes gleaming with a mix of admiration and fear, sitting upright, barely daring to breathe. "You see," Victor said in English with a faint smirk. "They always try to act polite, but deep down they're still just waitstaff." His tone was light, almost playful, but the words carried the sting of an invisible slap. Ethan gave a weak nod, unwilling to disagree. Then, as if to seal his disdain, Victor switched to Arabic, his voice low and quick. The words slid into Maya's ears like thin blades. She's probably not very educated, just good at carrying trays. She understood every word, every syllable, every sneer. Her hand tightened around the serving tray until her knuckles turned white. But her face remained calm, her expression untouched, not a flicker betraying the storm rising within. She was used to men like him, those who believed power excused their lack of decency. During her years at Silverstone, Maya had dealt with drunk customers, rude ones, and those who treated staff like they were invisible. But Victor was different. His cruelty came not from ignorance, but from a deep conviction that she was beneath respect. When she returned to the bar, Brandon asked quietly, "That guy at table 4, right? What's going on?" Maya gave a tired smile. "It's fine. Just someone who likes to test how far they can go." Brandon frowned. "If he crosses the line, I'll tell the manager." "No need," she replied softly, her voice cool. "I'll handle it." At table 4, Victor continued his little game. He ordered with a lazy arrogance, "Bring me the lamb, and tell the chef not to burn it. I don't trust the way they cook here." Maya nodded. "Yes, sir." She turned to Ethan, who spoke gently. "I'll have the salmon, thank you." That simple thank you, small as it was, reminded Maya that some people still understood respect. She smiled, genuine this time. "Thank you. Would you like vegetables or rice with that?" Ethan chose vegetables, his voice easing as if freed from the tension that hung over the table. But Victor laughed, this time openly, without restraint. He spoke again in Arabic, loud enough for Maya to hear. "Look at her. Who does she think she is? Just a waitress pretending to matter." The tone was sharp, dripping with contempt. A few nearby diners turned their heads, not understanding the words, but hearing the mockery in his voice. Maya placed the order slip on the kitchen counter and stood still for a few seconds. Her heartbeat was slow but heavy. In her mind, she saw her grandmother in Cairo, the warm-skinned woman with the gentle smile and steady voice, reciting Arabic proverbs to her every night. When people use words to bring you down, stay silent so they can see their own reflection. Maya had lived by that lesson through all her years in service, but today silence no longer felt enough. Her grandmother had also told her, "Language is a sword." And now, perhaps it was time to draw that sword, not for revenge, but to reclaim her dignity. Across the room, Victor kept talking and laughing. The midday sunlight streamed through the glass, reflecting off the table, casting golden light on the watch he wore, the same watch he believed defined his worth. What he didn't notice were Maya's eyes from behind the counter, calm, steady, and sharp as steel forged in fire. She took a deep breath, smoothed her hair, adjusted her apron. Her anger was no longer fire. It had become ice, cold and precise. As the dishes neared completion, Maya glanced at the clock. Her moment was approaching. And at that corner table, Victor Karim still sat there, confident that the world was in his hands, unaware that in just a few minutes, every eye in the room would be looking at him very differently. 12:30 in the afternoon. Silverstone Grill was packed. The crystal glasses clinked together, creating a delicate sound like glass on the verge of breaking. At the corner table, Victor Karim still sat there, leaning back in his chair with the authority of a man accustomed to command. Beneath his crisp white shirt gleamed a Patek Philippe watch, worth more than what most of the restaurant's servers made in a year. Maya Turner carried out a basket of warm bread, steam rising in soft curls. She approached Victor's table with her usual polite smile, every movement precise and professional, the hallmark of Silverstone's service. "Here's some bread and butter to start, sir." Victor didn't look at her. He lifted his glass of water, his eyes sliding over her before turning to Ethan Brooks. His voice dropped, switching to Arabic, quiet yet sharp. "Cheap, just like the one who brought it." A sentence as light as air. But in that language, it landed like a blade. Maya froze for half a second. Her fingers trembled, barely noticeable, and for a moment it felt as if her heart had stopped. But by the time Ethan looked up, her face had already returned to perfect composure. She bowed slightly and said, "I hope you both enjoy your meal." She turned away, each step heavier than stone. Behind her, Victor kept speaking, his voice low but laced with cruelty. "Look at the way she walks, as if she's someone important." This time, a few nearby guests sensed something was wrong. They couldn't understand Arabic, but the tone, cold, mocking, full of disdain, was unmistakable. Ethan lowered his head, his face tense. He understood every word, and the more he understood, the deeper his shame grew for his employer. Maya stopped in the middle of the aisle. She straightened, inhaled deeply. No one noticed, but something within her was stirring. Not anger, but dignity. She remembered her childhood in Cairo, in that small home that always smelled of freshly baked bread. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind. "You can measure a person's character by how they speak to those who serve them." That lesson, long buried under the dust of years, now returned clearer than ever. Victor thought she didn't understand. He was wrong. She understood every word, every laugh, every self-satisfied glance. And because she understood, she wouldn't let it continue. When she returned to the bar, Brandon whispered, "Maya, if he goes too far, I'll call Richard." She shook her head. "Not yet. I have my own way." There was something different in her eyes now. It was no longer the weary look of a tired employee, but the calm determination of someone ready to reclaim her dignity. At table 4, Victor kept talking loudly to Ethan about business deals, his voice raised as if he wanted everyone to know he was rich. Each time a server passed by, he gave them a smug glance, his smile curling with mockery. Ethan leaned in and murmured, "Sir, maybe you should keep your voice down. She might hear you." Victor scoffed. "So what if she does?" She wouldn't understand a word. Then, deliberately, he spoke louder, his Arabic slicing through the air. "Women like her belong in the kitchen. She's not even worthy of looking at me." Maya heard it all. The words cut through the air and struck the pride she had kept buried for so long. It wasn't that she was hurt. It was the realization that if she stayed silent, he would believe this behavior was acceptable. She set the water jug on the tray and walked back to the table. Her voice was still soft, her eyes still bright. "Excuse me, sir. Let me refill your glass." She tilted the jug gently, letting the water pour in a steady stream. The sound of it was like the ticking of a clock counting down to what was about to happen. Victor looked up, the same smirk on his lips, and just as the glass filled to the brim, he spoke again, in Arabic, dripping with arrogance. She should be grateful just to stand here. Someone like her is only fit to scrub floors. The glass was full. Maya set the jug down and met his gaze. Her eyes were no longer soft. They were deep as the sea, sharp as fire. A heavy silence stretched between them. The entire room had yet to realize what was coming, but time itself seemed to pause. Victor sat there, confident, arrogant, believing he had won his little game of power. But he didn't know that the language he had used to demean another human being was about to become the very thing that brought him to his knees in silence. Because in just a few seconds, Maya Turner would open her mouth, and the entire world around him would fall quiet. No one inside Silverstone Grill knew that in that exact moment, as the glass touched the table, the quiet history of an ordinary afternoon was about to change direction. Not through shouting, not through chaos, but through something far more powerful. Words. Maya stood tall, her hand resting lightly on the edge of the tray. Sunlight streamed through the window, casting her face half in light, half in shadow. In her dark eyes there was no longer patience, only the calm before a storm. She took a deep breath, then spoke. In Arabic, fluent, precise, every syllable sharp as a blade drawn from its sheath. "Would you like some more bread, sir? Or have the insults filled you enough already?" The sound tore through the air. Victor's head jerked up. The phone slipped from his fingers, nearly falling to the floor. Ethan's mouth dropped open, as if he had just witnessed a miracle. Several diners nearby looked up, not understanding the words, but sensing instantly that something extraordinary had happened. Maya didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her tone was soft as velvet, but forged in steel. Victor stared at her, his face paling before forcing out a brittle laugh. "Oh, you know a few phrases from a travel book? How cute." Maya tilted her head slightly, still speaking in Arabic, her tone low yet clear enough for him to hear every word. "No, I learned from my grandmother, the woman who raised me in Cairo, and every word you've said since you sat down, I understood perfectly." The room fell completely silent. The clinking of cutlery, the murmur of conversation, all ceased, as if the entire restaurant were holding its breath. Victor sat frozen for a few seconds, his lips parting and closing again, unable to find a single word to mock her with. Across the table, Ethan Brooks bowed his head, his hands clenched tightly together, his face filled with a mix of shame and awe. He didn't dare look at his boss, but his eyes flicked toward Maya, the gaze of someone who had just witnessed true strength, the kind that needed neither wealth nor authority. Maya stepped half a pace closer, not to threaten, but simply to stand face to face. "You assumed I didn't understand you, and that gave you permission to insult me. But respect isn't a luxury, and it doesn't come with the price tag of your suit." Her voice was calm, but each word landed like a hammer striking the table. Ethan swallowed hard, his heart racing. He had never seen Victor cornered like this, not by shareholders, not by the media, but by a waitress. Victor gave a strained chuckle, but it came out hollow. "Do you think that just because you can speak a few words, you're on my level?" Maya replied instantly, sharp and unwavering. "I don't need to think it. I know it." A heavy silence fell. "The language you speak doesn't belong to you. It belongs to those who honor it, something you clearly don't." A quiet ripple of whispers spread across the surrounding tables. Guests tilted their heads, watching. They couldn't understand the Arabic, but they didn't need to. They could hear the truth in her tone. They could feel the shift happening, power turning to weakness, silence becoming voice. Victor straightened his shoulders, trying to reclaim control. He switched to English, his tone heavy with arrogance. "You're just a waitress. Money buys power. It always has." Maya didn't blink. Money can buy the best seat in the room, but it will never buy respect. That's something you have to earn. Each word sliced cleanly through the thick air. A woman at a nearby table set her fork down gently, her eyes never leaving the scene. A man beside her gave a quiet nod. Maya looked directly at Victor, her voice soft but cutting. "You asked if I understood Arabic. I do. But more than that, I understand that those who use it to humiliate others only prove they don't deserve the language itself. Victor said nothing. His face flushed red, then drained of color. Ethan turned away, unable to look. In that instant, the man who once made hundreds bow their heads lost every ounce of power he had. No one in the room spoke. Only the faint jazz music continued, slow and wistful, like a backdrop to a lesson being written in real time. Maya didn't break eye contact, but her tone softened, filled with quiet grace. I used to think silence was the best way to keep this job. But today I understand. Sometimes silence means complicity. And I can't do that anymore. Her words fell into the room like a revelation. Victor lowered his head, speechless. And Maya, she didn't win with anger, nor with defiance. She won with the calm strength of someone who knows their worth. And in that moment, inside the expensive heart of Manhattan, every gaze turned toward her, the small waitress, teaching a billionaire the most priceless lesson of his life. Respect is never optional. The air inside Silverstone Grill felt as if all the oxygen had been drained away. The chatter and laughter that once filled the room had vanished, leaving only faint breaths, and the sound of silverware abandoned mid-meal. Every gaze was fixed on table 4, where a billionaire, once used to commanding others, now sat frozen like a statue. Victor Karim tried to force a smile, but his lips were dry. Beside him, Ethan Brooks stared down at the tablecloth, his thoughts tangled in confusion. He didn't know whether to intervene or stay silent. But behind his unease was something clearer than fear. Shame. Maya Turner still stood there, back straight, calm, as if she hadn't just said something that shook the entire room. But inside, her heart was pounding fast. Not from fear, but from knowing she had crossed the boundary of silence, and there was no going back. Victor sniffed, his voice raspy, as he tried to sound composed. "Do you think what you did will embarrass me? The world still runs on money, not on your pretty words." Maya looked straight at him, her voice low but firm. "Money can make people bow, but it can't make anyone respect you. Respect is earned by how you treat others." A few guests nodded subtly. No one spoke aloud, but everyone understood. They were witnessing something rare. The truth spoken aloud in a place where people usually bowed their heads in fear of losing their jobs. Victor turned away, hiding the trembling of his hands beneath the table. He had never been challenged like this. Not in boardrooms, not at global conferences, and certainly not by a woman of color he had dismissed as invisible. Anger rose in him. He spoke in a low voice, still clinging to authority. "You're just a waitress. The day I pay for a meal, you'll still be here bowing to men like me." Maya smiled faintly, her gaze calm enough to chill the air. "And one day, you'll realize that not everyone who bows is weak. Some bow to stay composed, to see more clearly who's truly small." Her words made Ethan lift his head, his eyes wavering. He knew Maya wasn't just speaking to Victor. She was speaking for everyone who had ever stayed silent out of fear. People like him. A long silence followed. Victor swallowed hard, gripping his glass without noticing his hand was shaking. "Do you think a few of your words will make me change?" Maya replied softly, her tone like a gentle wind. "I don't need you to change. I just want you to understand that language isn't meant for humiliation. It's meant for connection. And you just used it to sever yourself from the best part of being human." Victor opened his mouth, but no words came out. A man at a nearby table whispered to his wife, "She's right." The woman nodded, eyes glistening. Ethan couldn't stay silent any longer. He leaned forward, his voice quiet, but firm enough for the table to hear. "Mr. Victor, maybe you should stop. No one here is on your side." The words landed like nails on the floor. Victor turned to glare at him, but his eyes no longer held control. Ethan didn't regret it. His voice trembled, but he spoke clearly. She didn't do anything wrong. She's only asking for the respect every person deserves. Ethan's words seemed to let the room breathe again. Someone began to clap, once, twice, then again. It wasn't loud, but it carried meaning, quiet approval. Victor's jaw tightened. Never in his life had he been made to feel this powerless. He wanted to shout, to storm out, to reclaim the authority he once wielded effortlessly, but Maya's eyes held him still. There was no hatred in them, no mockery, only the gaze of someone who had been hurt enough to understand how precious dignity truly is. Maya tilted her head slightly, her voice calm and low, almost like a reminder. I don't need your apology. I just need you to remember. Because sometimes what truly changes a person isn't money. It's the moment they realize they've lost their humanity. Victor said nothing. Only the soft jazz music returned, blending with the faint clinking of spoons against glasses. But the air had changed. No one looked at Victor as a powerful billionaire anymore. They saw only a man suffocating beneath his own arrogance. And Maya, she quietly walked away from the table, back to the counter. She didn't need applause. She didn't need anyone to defend her. She knew the silence that followed from the man who once insulted her was the greatest victory of all. And that afternoon, inside Silverstone Grill, in the heart of New York, a billionaire learned a lesson no business school could ever teach. When words are used to humiliate, they can also become the sword that cuts through arrogance. No one in the restaurant knew why tears suddenly rolled down the face of a woman sitting in the corner. Perhaps it was because, in Maya Turner's voice, she heard something more than defiance. She heard dignity awakening. The atmosphere inside Silverstone Grill had turned still, sacred almost, like a cathedral. At the center table, where the golden light fell upon Victor Karim's face, every layer of power he had built through money, fame, and fear was slowly crumbling to dust. Maya did not leave. She stood tall, her gaze no longer challenging, but filled with the quiet empathy of someone who had known pain herself. Then she spoke, this time in Arabic, her tone gentle yet resonant, as though she were speaking to her own memories. My grandmother once told me, the tongue is a sword. You can use it to cut down arrogance or to lift others up. The words hung in the air, and the room held its breath. No one understood the language, yet everyone could feel the rhythm of truth pulsing through it. A young couple exchanged glances. An older man nodded quietly, as though he had just heard something sacred. Victor froze. The word grandmother struck him. In Maya's eyes, he saw the reflection of the woman who had raised her, and suddenly, his pride collided with his own forgotten past. He remembered his mother, the one who once told him, "A man without respect is nothing at all." It had been a long time since he'd remembered that. Maya then switched to English, so everyone could hear. When I was a child, my father worked abroad. My mother passed away early, so I lived with my grandmother in Cairo. She didn't speak English, so if I wanted to talk to her, I had to learn her language. And I did, with my heart. Her voice did not tremble. It was soft and warm, flowing like a river through memory. She told me stories, recited prayers every morning, taught me to respect everyone, especially those who had nothing to offer in return. She said, "Dignity doesn't live in your wallet. It lives in how you treat people." A soft sob rose from a corner of the room. No one laughed, no one spoke. Because everyone felt it, the black waitress standing there wasn't just sharing her childhood. She was passing on an invisible legacy. Ethan Brooks looked up, watching her for a long moment. "Your grandmother sounds like an incredible woman," he said softly. Maya smiled. She was my whole world. And today, When Mr. Kareem used Arabic to insult me, he didn't just insult me. He insulted the language of my grandmother and the woman who taught me what self-respect means. The room fell into complete silence. Victor lowered his head. The light from the window cast shadows across his face, tracing the wrinkles like cracks in the mask of arrogance he'd worn for years. His voice came out rough, almost a confession. I didn't know, Maya replied, her tone light but cutting. That's right, you didn't know. But what's worse is that you never cared to know. Her words weren't just for Victor. They were for everyone who had ever walked into this restaurant and looked at a server without truly seeing them. A few guests grew teary-eyed. A man at a nearby table placed his hand on his wife's shoulder and whispered, "She's right." And Victor, he just sat there, staring at the glass of water in front of him. The condensation on its surface slid downward like cold sweat dripping from his forehead. Maya didn't press further. She didn't humiliate, didn't gloat. She simply stood there, her calm eyes like a mirror, forcing him to confront himself. Then she spoke slowly, each word touching the hearts of everyone listening. You can own everything, but without respect, you are still poor. My grandmother once told me, the truly rich are those who make others feel valued. Today, I just wanted to remind you of that. Her final words landed softly, like a breeze skimming across the surface of a still lake, gentle, yet leaving ripples that would not fade. Ethan bowed his head and whispered, almost to himself, "She just made us all fall silent." Maya said nothing. She turned away, leaving behind a wealthy man now face to face with the truest part of himself, the part he had long buried beneath checks and applause. And the room, after its long silence, somehow felt warmer. Not because of the lights, but because every heart there had just learned something simple, yet profound. Respect, when spoken with sincerity, will always be the most beautiful language of all. The air inside Silverstone Grill softened, as if even the walls themselves were absorbing Maya's words. No one spoke, no one lifted a fork. The entire room was wrapped in a strange silence, not one of fear, but of understanding. Victor Kareem sat upright, his hands clasped tightly together. The arrogance in his eyes had vanished, replaced by confusion. The man who had once signed billion-dollar deals, who could shake entire markets with a single decision, now couldn't find a single word to say to a young waitress. Ethan Brooks looked at his boss, his expression a mixture of pity and disappointment. He had once admired Victor, had looked up to him as the embodiment of success. But now that image had shattered. What he saw wasn't a business legend, but a man lost within the fog of his own ego. "Mr. Victor," Ethan finally said, his voice low and steady, "you should stop. She hasn't done anything wrong." Victor turned to him, his gaze flickering between anger and shame. But under the weight of all the eyes on him, he had nowhere left to hide. Everyone in the restaurant, customers and staff alike, was watching, waiting to see what the man who thought himself above everyone else would do when forced to bow his head. Manager Richard Cole stepped out from behind the bar. The middle-aged man with gray, streaked hair and calm composure walked over, his tone steady but commanding. "Is there a problem here?" Victor seized the moment, desperate to regain his dignity. "She insulted me," he said quickly. "I'm a paying customer, not someone who came here to be lectured." Richard looked at Maya, then glanced around the room. His eyes met dozens of faces, every one of them shaking their heads, witnesses to everything that had happened. Turning back, his voice grew firm and clear. "No, Mr. Kareem, I've been standing here long enough to know she hasn't insulted anyone. In fact, she handled this situation with more professionalism than most people I've ever met." A murmur of agreement spread through the room. Several guests nodded, Some even began to clap softly. Victor clenched his fists, his face flushing red, but the words of protest caught in his throat. Maya said nothing. She simply bowed her head slightly to Richard, then turned to Victor, her tone calm and steady. "I'm not here to embarrass you. I just don't want anyone else to go through the same thing." Victor stayed silent. His eyes drifted across the room, catching the stares of those around him, and then his own reflection in the glass of water before him, distorted and lonely. He had always believed respect came from power, but now he finally understood. Power can't make anyone respect a person who doesn't deserve it. Maya continued, her voice soft but unwavering. "I don't want people to bow out of fear, nor shout to be heard. Sometimes just listening is enough to change someone's entire day." Ethan looked at her, admiration shining in his eyes. Richard gave a small nod, and the rest of the guests remained silent. Not the heavy silence of tension, but one filled with empathy. Victor lowered his head, his hands trembling slightly. He began, his voice hoarse. "I'm not used to being spoken to this way." Maya answered gently, yet with depth. "Maybe that's exactly why you needed to hear it." A brief pause followed. Then, from the far end of the restaurant, an elderly man spoke up. "Young lady, you just taught us all a lesson." His words unlocked the stillness. The room erupted into soft applause. It wasn't loud or raucous, but full of genuine respect. Maya bowed her head in gratitude. Under the warm, golden light, she no longer looked like an ordinary waitress. She seemed like a storyteller, someone who had just turned an afternoon filled with arrogance into a lasting moment of grace and humanity. Victor said nothing more. He just sat there in silence, while for the first time, everyone in the room truly began to listen. The soft applause gradually faded, leaving only the gentle hum of jazz weaving through the air. Silverstone Grill returned to its usual rhythm, but everyone knew nothing would ever be quite the same again. At table 4, Victor Karim sat in silence. The hands that had once confidently signed billion-dollar deals now trembled slightly, as if even the air around him carried the weight of shame. And Maya Turner, she remained where she was. Not proud, not triumphant, simply calm, as though everything that had happened was inevitable. She looked at Victor for a moment and spoke quietly, just enough for him to hear. "You asked if I thought I was your equal. The truth is, I never needed your approval. I know my worth, just as everyone here knows theirs." The words struck like an arrow without a sound, piercing straight into Victor's mind. He lifted his gaze and met the eyes staring back at him, no longer filled with admiration, only disappointment and pity. Ethan Brooks spoke softly, his voice steady. "Mr. Victor, we should stop. Not for them, but for you." Victor turned toward him, his eyes unsteady. "Stop? You think I'm afraid of a waitress?" Ethan sighed. "No, sir. I think you're afraid of yourself." The air grew heavy. A few customers looked away, but their attention lingered on the table. Maya didn't intervene. She let the two men face their own truths. At last, Victor bowed his head, his shoulders trembling. His voice came out low, no longer defiant but weary. "You're right. I forgot how to respect." No one laughed. No one applauded. Only the soft golden light of noon fell across his face, making him appear smaller, not because of status, but because, for the first time, he looked human. Maya didn't seize the moment to humiliate him. She simply nodded and said gently, almost in a whisper, "No one is perfect. But the most precious thing is knowing when to stop before we hurt someone else." Victor looked up, his eyes meeting hers. There was no longer the gaze of superiority, only that of a man learning to look at another person without judgment. "You learned that from your grandmother?" "Yes," Maya smiled. She used to say, People might forget everything, but they'll always remember how you made them feel. A faint smile appeared on Victor's lips, fragile, tired, but genuine. He gave a small nod. Thank you. For the first time that afternoon, no one looked at him with anger. They all knew this man had just learned the most valuable lesson money could never buy. Maya stepped back toward the counter, taking off her apron and standing beside Richard Cole. The manager looked at her with quiet pride. You didn't just handle the situation, Maya. You taught this entire restaurant a lesson. She smiled softly. I only repeated what my grandmother used to say. At table 4, Victor still sat in silence, gazing out the window. Outside, Manhattan glowed under the sunlight. Crowds hurried past, unaware that inside this room, a man had just lost, and then rediscovered the best part of himself. When Maya returned with the main course, he spoke quietly. You were right. Money can buy many things, but not respect. She replied warmly, and the best part is, respect doesn't cost a thing. The table fell silent. Ethan looked between them, his face softening, as if a weight had been lifted. Amid the gentle sound of silverware resuming, Maya smiled faintly. Because she understood, some storms don't need to destroy anything. They only need to pass through just enough to sweep away the dust of arrogance that covers the human heart. And that day, in the heart of New York, a waitress made power lose its voice with just one word: respect. The lamb was served, its aroma spreading softly across the table. Maya placed the plate before Victor Karim with steady hands, her movements calm and graceful, as if no storm had ever passed through. There was no trace of bitterness, no hint of pride, only a serenity so profound it made others lower their gaze. Victor looked up. In his eyes, there was no longer anger or arrogance, only something harder to name, a mix of weariness, embarrassment, and perhaps gratitude. He picked up his knife and fork, but paused midway. In all his life, he had never felt a dining table so heavy. Beside him, Ethan Brooks sat quietly. He glanced at his boss, then at Maya, the woman who had silenced an entire room without power or fame. A strange feeling welled up in him, one he hadn't known in years. Pure admiration, the kind no amount of money could ever buy. For a while, only the faint sound of silver against porcelain filled the air. Then Victor set his fork down, clearing his throat, his voice lower and softer than before. What you said was right. You spoke in a language I had forgotten, the language of dignity. Maya stood still, smiling faintly. No one ever truly forgets, sir. But sometimes people let power speak for them so long that they stop hearing the voice of their own heart. Victor said nothing. Her words felt like a mirror, showing him a reflection he had ignored for years. A man who once believed that coldness was strength, now realizing that coldness was only the fear of losing his humanity. He leaned back, eyes drifting toward the window. Across the street, construction workers were eating lunch on the sidewalk, laughing loudly. In them, he saw a kind of freedom that money could never buy, the joy of being simple, unguarded, real. Ethan broke the silence. I think this is the first time I've ever seen you this quiet. Victor exhaled, his tone faint, almost like a confession. Maybe this is the first time I've had a reason to be. His words drew the table into thoughtful silence. Maya didn't respond, just stood there with softened eyes. For a fleeting moment, she no longer saw an arrogant man before her, but a human being. Someone learning, finally, how to be one. After a pause, Victor spoke again, this time in Arabic, his voice barely above a whisper. Thank you for reminding me. Maya answered in the same language, her tone gentle as a breeze. There's nothing to thank me for. We're all human, Just remember, words can either save or destroy. It depends on how we use them." Her voice carried no judgment, only understanding. And that alone made Victor bow his head, nodding slowly, as if accepting something long overdue. As she turned to leave, Richard Cole approached, resting a hand on her shoulder. "This restaurant just learned something bigger than any meal we've ever served," he said softly. Maya smiled. "I only did what my grandmother would have done." From a distance, a few guests exchanged quiet glances, hands brushing together in silent acknowledgement. A middle-aged man leaned toward his son and whispered, "See, real strength isn't in speaking louder, it's in speaking truth." Victor heard that. He closed his eyes and exhaled slowly, as though shedding the heavy shell of pride that had burdened him for years. Maya began clearing the empty glasses, preparing to walk away. But just as she turned, Victor spoke, for the first time with genuine sincerity in his voice. "Ms. Turner, I owe you an apology." She paused, not turning back, and said quietly, "No, sir. You owe yourself one." There was a long silence before she walked away. Behind her, Victor watched, his eyes glistening. For the first time in years, he felt richer without spending a single dollar. And as Maya disappeared through the kitchen doors, he understood. She hadn't just served a meal. She had served the entire room a lesson in humanity. When Maya Turner returned with her tray to clear the table, Silverstone Grill felt entirely different. The conversations had resumed, but they were softer, slower, as if everyone was afraid to disturb the sacred silence that had just filled the room. At table 4, Victor Karim sat deep in thought. The lamb before him had gone cold, but he didn't care. He was swallowing something else, his pride. Ethan Brooks sat beside him, still silent. He knew his boss was wrestling with himself, and he also knew there were some battles only won by surrendering at the right moment. When Maya approached, Victor looked up. The coldness in his eyes was gone. What remained was the look of a man trying to remember how to speak with sincerity. He spoke quietly, this time in English, so that everyone could hear. "You were right. I forgot the most fundamental thing." Maya smiled gently. "That's all right, sir. Every day is a chance to remember." He nodded, his voice low but steady. "I used to think I understood the value of money, but now I realize I never understood the value of people. It wasn't just an admission, it was a release." A guest nearby nodded subtly. A young waiter smiled. Even Richard Cole, the manager, stood behind the bar, pride shining in his eyes. Victor bowed his head, pulled out a stack of cash, and placed it on the tray. The crisp bills gleamed under the light like reflections from crystal glasses. But Maya didn't reach for them. She looked at him directly, her eyes kind but firm. "A tip can't buy back what's been lost, sir. Respect is the only thing that remains when the meal is over." Victor froze. He looked down, then gently pushed the money toward her, not to insist, but as a gesture of peace. "You don't have to take it, but consider it a thank you." Maya shook her head softly. "There's no need, Mr. Karim. Today, we've all paid enough for our lessons." She turned away, her steps slow but steady. Victor watched her go, his hand tightening and then loosening again. His eyes fell on the half-empty glass of water. A droplet slid down the side, landing on the tablecloth and spreading outward in a small, rippling circle, like the echo of her words still hanging in the air. Ethan murmured, "Mr. Victor, maybe this will stay with you longer than any deal ever could." Victor gave a faint smile, his voice hoarse. "You're right. Money can fill a wallet, but it can't fill a man's sense of dignity." He stood, buttoning his vest jacket, and looked around the room at the faces that had changed. No one looked fearful anymore. No one looked impressed. They looked at him simply as a man, and strangely, that made him feel lighter. When Victor and Ethan left the restaurant, the door closed softly behind them. A few guests began to clap, not for victory, but for awakening. Richard walked over and rested a hand on Maya's shoulder, his voice warm. "You just turned a lunch service into a lesson in humanity. Today, Silverstone didn't just serve food, it served truth." Maya smiled, her eyes glowing beneath the sunlight, streaming through the glass. Sometimes, all it takes is the right word at the right moment to make the whole world fall silent. The music rose again, gentle and flowing like a river after rain. No one knew whether Victor Karim would truly change. But everyone knew this. From that day on, he would never again use words to belittle another human being. Because in that room, an ordinary waitress had proven something extraordinary. True power doesn't lie in money or status, but in how we make others feel. And just one timely sentence was enough to turn a man of power into a man capable of humility. From the perspective of a social psychologist, the moment between Maya Turner and Victor Karim was more than just a confrontation. It was a vivid study of power and dignity. When language is used to belittle, it doesn't just wound the person it targets, it slowly erodes the worth of the one who speaks it. Conversely, when someone dares to respond with calmness, intelligence, and respect, they don't just defend themselves, they awaken the best parts of everyone around them. Because in a world that grows noisier by the day, true strength doesn't come from shouting the loudest, but from speaking rightly and speaking with respect. If Maya's story made you reflect, give this video a like to help spread the message that respect is never optional. And don't forget to subscribe to see more stories like this, where ordinary people continue to teach us extraordinary lessons about character and compassion. Finally, leave a comment with the phrase, "Keep your dignity," as a reminder that no matter who you are or where you come from, the most valuable thing you can offer is how you treat others.